stuff, you know. Who remembers what we talked about last week?
So like I did everything.
Pete,
Doing the opposite thing as well.
you got your stuff? Taking notes? Who remembers what we talked about last week? Really? It was such a good class last week. Yeah?
Talked about vocations.
What did that mean?
Like what you're meant to do in life.
All right. Yeah. What you're meant to do in life. Yeah.
Pete, could you give me a sheet? What a calling is and what our calling is.
Okay. Calling. We kind of use three words. We use calling, vocation, and what you were made for. You know, kind of interchangeably. That's good. And we'll take a time out.
Ava, can you get me anything? Yeah. Word. Oh, can I have one of those?
Hey, you see how disruptive this is, right? Yeah. It's not peaceful.
My dad made me good.
He made you go to Starbucks?
That's not food items.
Ava, are there any straws?
Okay, well, today we have a guest speaker who I met a month ago or so. His name is Keith, and he's a chaplain at CHI Health, primarily at Emmanuel Hospital. And he's going to talk about how he determined God's call or his vocation or his calling or his what he was made to do in his life. So here's Keith. All right.
I feel so important. Oh, look, there's my
Oh, we have handouts too, yeah.
How'd you get my picture?
It's on your Gmail.
Oh, it is, isn't it? All right, cool.
Will stop you on this.
He's stalking me now.
It didn't take too long.
All right, well, guys, thanks for having me here. This is fun. I've never been asked to like come and share my life before, so.
Really?
This is exciting. I didn't think it was that great, but it must be. I do work as a chaplain at a hospital. Do you guys know what how a hospital chaplain is and does? Does anybody have an idea what that is? Yeah?
Isn't that what that one guy was?
Like, do they work in the churches that are in, like, the hospital?
Kind of like a pastor, but at a hospital instead of at a church. So we pray with people that are sick, and we go and be with families when people die, and we just help people out that are not feeling too good in the hospital. And so it took me a long time to figure out that that's what I wanted to do for my calling, to figure out that that's what I was meant to be. I like those three terms, that vocation. And so, yeah, Will just heard me talking a little bit about that one time. We were at a meeting together, and he said, hey, that sounds like you've got kind of an interesting story. Would you come talk to the kids about it? So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to just give you a little story of my life and kind of how I got to where I am. I've always kind of wondered what my calling is. I'm going to use the word calling today, okay? Because that's the one I like the best. My life has been kind of boring, actually. If I were a motivational speaker, I'd be the most boring motivational speaker that there ever was. I don't have a great big exciting story of somebody who like was deep into drugs or gangs and all this stuff and then came out of it and is now this great person. I was always kind of just a regular guy. You know, I was actually kind of a boring kid, believe it or not. My favorite thing to do after school was to go home. And most of my friends would come over to my house because we had a pool table in my basement. And that's what I like to do, is just hang out with my friends at my own house. And so that's the same today. I'm a dorky dad, and I love it. I love being a dorky dad. I love telling silly jokes. In fact, Alexa just told me a joke. Anybody got an Alexa? Oh my goodness, you all have Alexas. That's awesome. That's awesome. I said, Alexa, tell me a cat joke. Have you ever done that one? She says, what does a cat say on a cell phone?
Meow.
Can you hear me out?
Oh. What?
I get it.
See,
me
Okay.
now? Like, can you hear me now?
You guys are all junior high,
That
right?
makes sense.
So when I was in high school, before you guys were all born, by the way, I'm old and I love being old, it's great. I don't know if I'm as old as Will, but my favorite teacher in high school was Mr. Dover. Mr. Dover, and his first name was Neil. Neil Dover. That was his real name. And he, Neil Dover. His wife was Eileen Dover. They had a son named Ben.
That is
And they named their dog Tip. So anyway, no, he was cool. He taught the business classes because I wasn't into agriculture. I lived in a farming town. I wasn't into farming. I wasn't into shop and all that stuff. So I took all the business classes, and Mr. Dover became a really good friend of mine. And he was old too. He was had taught at my high school for like 30-some years. And he could retire any day he wanted to. And I asked him one day, Mr. Dover, I said, why are you still teaching? I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but why are you still teaching? If you've taught here for 30-some years, why don't you retire? You know, go have fun, do whatever you want to do instead of coming to work. And he said to me, he asked me, why would I retire when this is what I love to do? He said, I would be bored if I was retired and couldn't come and teach, be a school teacher. And I thought about that, and that has stuck with me even to this day. It's been over 20 years since I was in high school. And even as a high school student, I understood that. And I thought to myself from that point on, that's what I want. I don't want to be a business teacher in a high school. I want to have that job, that vocation, that calling to which I would never want to retire from. Isn't that cool? And so I made that kind of my goal. I didn't know what it was going to be yet, but I wanted to search for that. So as I was in high school, I kind of got into youth groups and stuff. I loved youth group and loved everything about youth group. Junior high youth group, senior high youth group. I volunteered. I was at my church more than some of the pastors were at the church. In fact, we got a new youth pastor one time at my church, and everybody said, talk to Keith. He'll fill you in on what's going on in the youth stuff at the church. And so that kind of became a passion for me. And I decided, that would be kind of what I would want to do with my life, some sort of ministry in a church. That would be my calling. So I didn't quite know what to do with that, but I talked to my pastors about it, talked to my parents about it, and talked to some other people about it, and they kind of set me on the right path. Well, when you become a senior in high school, before you go to college, the Army will call you, and the Navy will call you, and the Air Force will call you, and they will say, have you thought about joining the Army, or thought about joining the Navy, or thought about joining the Air Force? And they called me up, and I said, nope, never thought about that. Nobody in my family's ever been in the military. Not very interested in doing that. But then the Marines called me. The Marines are kind of the tough guys, right? And he called me, and he said, well, could I at least come over and talk to you about it? And I hate telling people no, so I said, okay, you can come on over. So he came over and he gave me a presentation about what it was like to be in the Marines that just blew me away. And I was like, okay, sign me up. He said, okay. He goes, what kind of job are you interested in doing with your life? I said, well, I'd like to be kind of like a youth pastor or a pastor of a church or something like that. He said, oh. He goes, we don't have that in the Marines. He said, we have that in the Navy, but not in the Marines. Is there anything else that you like? And I thought, well, I've always kind of liked computers and technology, maybe something like that. And he said, okay, great, we can get you hooked up with that. But I got confused because I thought, well, I thought I wanted to be in ministry, now I want to do this. And I kind of thought God was even leading me a little bit towards being a pastor. But am I going against God now if I join the Marines? And so I had this really bad internal struggle for like a year as a senior in high school. And finally, towards the end of my high school career, I had thought about it enough and made the decision to not go into the Marines. I was one signature away from joining the Marine Corps, believe it or not. And I decided not to, decided to go to college and be more passionate about youth work. So I went off to college. I had a girlfriend. We started dating my senior year. She was my first girlfriend. I was a senior in high school. That's how much of a nerd I was and am. I didn't have a girlfriend until I was a senior in high school, but we fell madly in love with each other. And I was in college. She was a little bit younger than me. She was in high school yet. And we just had a great relationship. Had an awesome relationship until college was done. Okay. I went, college was done. I went to my college graduation. Okay. And after the graduation, we were having cake. Literally, she went from the cake to getting on a bus to go be a church camp counselor for the summer. And that was the last time I ever saw her as my girlfriend, because she dumped me on the phone. We had been together for 4 years. We were even engaged to be married. And she dumped me on the phone, yeah. Totally didn't even see it coming.
So nothing led up to it?
What's that?
Nothing led up to it? She just like thought?
Just like, yep, called me up one day and was like, I don't think things are working out. So in my mind, I had my whole life planned out. I was in college. I had just finished college. I was going to go to grad school, seminary, or graduate school and get a master's degree. We were going to get married the next year. I was going to get this master's degree, and I was going to go work at a church and be happily married, and everything was going to be great. When all of a sudden that day, towards the end of that summer, she called and said, I don't want to be with you anymore. And my world just collapsed. And I didn't get it. Because we had a very good relationship. In fact, we prayed together on our very first date. God was very active in our relationship. We were doing everything right. And all of a sudden it ended. And I cried. I didn't know what to do. I had my whole life planned out, and now none of it was going to happen. That was really hard. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't even want to go into youth ministry anymore. I didn't want to do anything. So I sat for a year. I had a little part-time job at a shopping mall, and I worked at that for about a year. Finally, just out of pure boredom, I went and started to go to grad school just because I was bored. So I packed up my stuff, moved to Dallas, Texas, and went to seminary to become a pastor. Now, when I was at seminary, one day I was walking through the student center, and here was a table. And this table had an Army recruiter at it, and he was recruiting people in seminary that are preparing to be pastors. He was recruiting people like me to become chaplains in the Army. And I walked up to his table and I thought, I'm just going to look at this and see what's going on. At that time, my brother-in-law was in the Marines, so I was going to get him a Bible to send over to him and everything. And long story short, I ended up talking to that recruiter, and I became a chaplain in the Army. Now, do you see how that kind of completes a circle? I wanted to be in the military back in high school, but at that time I couldn't be in the Marines because they didn't have chaplains. You couldn't be a pastor, so to speak, in the Marines. And now, here I am, 4 or 5 years later, the Army shows up, says, you can be a pastor in the Army. And I thought, wow, God, that is awesome. It's working out. It's pretty cool. And so that was my first lesson of learning that how faithful God is to us when we wait. When we wait. And it wasn't more than a year or two after that a friend of mine, whom I had been a girlfriend, not a girlfriend, but a girlfriend of mine that I had known for about 7 years, we started to date. And we started to fall in love. And we got engaged and got married. There's another kind of circle that closed. You see that, how that works out? And she hasn't left me yet. We've been married for 15 years. So I finished seminary and moved back home here to Omaha. And no sooner did we move to Omaha than my Army, and by the way, I was in the Army Reserves. Have you heard of this, where you just go for 1 weekend a month? And then you have like a normal job, just like anybody in the community, but you go do the Army 1 weekend a month, and then you come back. That's what I was doing. But they called up my unit to go to Iraq. And I had just moved here to Omaha. I didn't have a job yet. But I thought, hey, that's fine. That's cool. Because if they're going to call me to Iraq, then I don't have to worry about losing a job or anything like that. So I went to Iraq, and I was a chaplain for the Army in Iraq. Now, most times you hear people say it was terrible, I hated going to Iraq, and it was scary and all that stuff. And some of that's true. But for me, still trying to figure out who I am in this world and what my job should be and all this stuff, going to Iraq was a good thing. I was married, but I didn't have any kids. Okay, and my wife is a nurse. So she had plenty to do at her work, and we didn't have any kids to worry about. So off I went to Iraq, and I loved it. The work was great. I was who I was meant to be. I was Chaplain Smith. And for a whole year I got to be Chaplain Smith. And I had a purpose. My job there was much like it is in the hospital today. I would go around and visit soldiers, and I would talk to soldiers who were having problems. They would come to me for help with, maybe they were having problems with their marriage back home, or maybe they were struggling with being in Iraq so far away from their friends and family, and I could help them get through that. I got to lead worship and church services twice every Sunday and preach sermons and talk to groups like this all the time for a whole year. It was really, really good. I loved it. I had a purpose. I had a calling. But then guess what? We got to come home from Iraq. So I had all that going on, and in the matter of takes you about 2 weeks to come home from Iraq, because you don't just come home and then you're done. You got to go through all this stuff. But I went from that to back home to nothing. My wife is busy at her work. She's got a great job at a hospital as a nurse, and she loves it. And here I am back home, and now who am I? I'm not Chaplain Smith anymore. I'm just Keith. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to be kind of a youth pastor, a pastor of a church of some sort, but you can't just look up in the newspaper and find, in case you didn't know, you can't look in the newspaper and find churches that want to hire a pastor. They don't have that. So I got a whole bunch of big manila envelopes. I printed off my resume. I wrote a letter introducing myself, and I drove all around Omaha. And anytime I saw a church, I would pull over and I would knock on the door. This was like a Monday, so nobody was ever at the churches. And I would slide it under the door. I did that about 20 or 30 churches in Omaha. And guess what? None of them called me back. None of them, I got nothing out of that. And so I was kind of lost. I got a job at Office Max, stocking the shelves in the back room. I had been Chaplain Smith in the military, doing all these great things, and now I was stocking the shelves at Office Max. And they'd give me this great big box full of printer ink. And it was all jumbled together and mixed, and I had to sort each one out and hang it on the shelf all day. That's what I would do. It was pretty bad for me. I didn't know what my purpose was. Well, when you go to Iraq, you make lots of money. You get paid really well because you don't have to pay taxes on any of your money when you go to Iraq. And so we had lots of money. That wasn't a problem. My wife and I decided to buy a house with it because all we had was an apartment. So we called a real estate agent to help us buy a house. Lo and behold, this real estate agent is really only a part-time real estate agent. And he's a part-time real estate agent, and he is a full-time Douglas County Sheriff's deputy. He's a police officer. And so he's helping us buy a house. We picked a house out, and he was helping us sign the papers and do all that stuff, all that boring things like that. And we're walking to the car one day, and he says, "Hey, Keith, you have a job yet?" And I said, "Not really. I'm just working at Office Max, or whatever." He says, "Have you ever thought about being a police officer?" And I said, I kind of laughed like that. I said, "No." That's like the last thing I would ever want to do. he goes, okay, well, I was just mentioning it. A lot of times police departments are hiring, and you seem to be a pretty good guy, so I just thought I'd mention it. And I was like, okay, thanks, whatever. He could have just as soon said fly to the moon for all I cared, you know, as interested as I was in that. But you know what? That thought got into my mind. And I started thinking, you know, oh, I don't have a job to go to tomorrow. I don't know who I am. I thought, police is kind of cool. I'm kind of a normal guy. What guy doesn't think that it'd be cool to have a gun and a badge and drive in a car and with lights and sirens and catch the bad guys? And I thought that might be kind of cool. I've been to college. I have a college degree. Heck, I have a master's degree. And I've been in the military. That's got to be good for something if you want to be a police officer. And I've never been arrested. I've never done drugs or anything like that. So I'll bet you I could apply, and I'll bet they'd hire me to be a police officer. So I started to do that. I called my friend back, this real estate agent, and he said, okay, he goes, you don't just go and apply to be a police officer, though. He goes, it's a big, long process, so you might want to, he said, I have a friend who's a security guard who used to be a cop. He goes, he might hire you if you want to be a security guard. That might be kind of a good start. So I said, okay. I went and I got hired as a security guard. I was a mall cop type of guy. You know, all I had was a big wad of keys and a cell phone. And so I would go to like construction sites at night, and I would walk around with my keys and my cell phone. And if I saw anything, my job was to call the cops and go hide somewhere. But my boss was a former police officer. I thought, hey, maybe if I can get in good with him, I can get a job somewhere maybe. When you fill out an application to become a police officer, it's like that thick. It's huge. You have to write down everybody you know, everywhere you've ever lived, everything you've ever done. You have to go in and have interviews. You have to go out to a track and take a test and see how fast you can run a mile and a half and do push-ups and all this stuff. You have to go see doctors and psychiatrists, make sure you're okay in the head. And it takes weeks and weeks and weeks and paperwork after paperwork after paperwork just to apply to become a police officer. And that doesn't even mean they're going to hire you. That's just to apply. And every time you do it, there's probably 200 or 300 other people that want the same job you want. So it was no small task. So it took me about 2 years. For 2 years I did this. I would start an application. I would go to these tests. I would go to these interviews. And I would get turned down for 2 years. There would be maybe like, okay, we're going to hire 3 people, and there's 4 of you left out of everybody, so we're only going to hire 3 of you 4, and I'd be like the 4th one that didn't get hired. Or I'd have that final interview with the police chief or with the sheriff himself, and then I'd get a call the next day and they'd say, we're sorry you weren't selected. And that happened again, and again, and again, and again. Literally, no joke, up between 25 to 30 times I did that. Everywhere. There's a lot of police departments and places around you guys probably wouldn't even know about. You know, you've got the state patrolmen, you've got the county sheriff's offices, you've got the city police departments, you've got, the county sheriff's departments for other counties. Papillion has a police department. Omaha has a police department. Boys Town has a police department. The airport has its own police department. There's a ton of things around this area. I went all the way to Kearney, like 2 or 3 hours away, applied out there. I went all the way into Iowa. Anybody ever heard of Denison, Iowa? I went to Denison, Iowa, which is a town about 60 miles from here. Applied all over the place for 2 years, and never got hired. Until one day, I got a phone call from Lincoln, Nebraska, Lincoln Police Department. I kind of forgot that I'd even applied to them. And they said, we'd like you to come back and have this certain kind of interview. And I knew that if they called you to have that certain kind of interview, that was a big deal. That this meant they're seriously considering me. I went and had the interview. It went well. And a few days later, they called me. I was laying on my couch. I still remember because I didn't have a full-time job, just doing the security guard thing. And they said, guess what? Congratulations, we'd like to offer you a position as a Lincoln police officer. I jumped off the couch. I put on my coat. I ran to the daycare where I had a little baby at the time. I picked up my baby from the daycare. I drove to the hospital where my wife was working. I ran into the hospital onto her floor. Probably shouldn't have done that. And I was like, they hired me. I got a job. Yay. You know, and she ran to me and hugged me, and we were so happy. And it was awesome. It was awesome. Even to this day, one of the best days of my life when I got selected. There had been, at that time, there had been 300 people in this big hotel conference room that came. They put it in the newspaper. Anybody in the community that wants to be a police officer, come on this Saturday morning to take a test and, you know, go from there. And there was about 300 of us there that day. And they ended up hiring 7 of us. So that's pretty good odds, right? I was feeling pretty good about myself. Well, the training began. And it was going to be a 20-week training in Lincoln. You get to come home every night, and it was fun. We got our police uniforms. We got all the stuff. I got the cool belt, you know, and everything except the gun we got. Okay, had that little stick thing that you flick and it comes out, you know. Baton, yeah. We got our handcuffs. Everything except the gun and the badge itself. We had all this cool equipment. We got to take classes on learning some of the laws. They handed us our radios, so we learned how to practice talking all those codes and things that police officers always say. That was fun. We got to go outside of Lincoln somewhere. I can't remember where. There's a whole bunch of roads that are kind of like in a grid or whatever. We got to drive police cars out there, and we each got to pick a police car and drive out there and spend all day like skidding around the corners. And they had cones set up, and you had to drive through the cones, and then you had to do it all backwards, and it was really cool. It was really cool. And then at the end, one of the real police officers, he would get in the car, and we had to like practice chasing him with the sirens and like skidding around the corners and everything. It was so cool. It was so cool. We didn't get to keep our guns, but we got to start using the guns a little bit, which was really cool. Because if you're at all interested in being a police officer with guns, you got to kind of like guns. And we got to go and we got issued our guns. We couldn't keep them yet, but we got issued our guns. And we learned how to handle them right. We were learning how to shoot them and everything. And so cool, so cool. I was having a blast. Then came the 3rd week. And it was the 3rd or 4th week, and we had a class called Prevailing Mindset. Prevailing Mindset, okay? Now this is a class where they teach you, just a one-day class, where they teach you the mindset, kind of the attitude, the personality that you need to have if you're going to be a successful police officer. This is kind of the mindset you need to have, and here's why, they say. And they have a TV like up in the corner, and they start showing us a bunch of surveillance camera videos of jewelry store robberies and have you ever seen like the dash cams on TV where you can see the police officer walking up to a car that they've pulled over, you know, and have you ever seen those? They show us a bunch of those videos where the police officer's all messed up. And they're terrible, because you start seeing these police officers getting beat up, some even worse. We saw a video of a police officer get shot, just for no reason. There had been a jewelry store robbery, and it was done. It was done, and there's a police officer standing there, there's another police officer, and then there's the owner of the store, and they're just standing around talking, because the store's already been robbed. And we were watching it, and this guy runs in the door, boom, shoots the police officer and runs out. And I was like...
What about the other police officer?
Yeah, it was so fast, there was nothing he could do. It was crazy.
Was he okay?
No, he got killed.
Oh.
Yeah, he got killed.
Not listening.
And so I'm terrified. I'm terrified about this. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, they call in the police officer from Lincoln, who was the last police officers at that point to have had to shoot and kill somebody in the line of duty. And he got to come and he told us the story about how there had been a guy that broke out of prison, and he caught him. He pulled him over, he caught him, and he turned around, and when he turned back around, this criminal was coming at him with a knife above his head, just a few feet away, and he was going to kill the police officer, and the police officer had no choice but to shoot this bad guy and kill him. And he got to tell us the whole story. There was nothing controversial about it. You know, he did the right thing, so they're telling us all this. Why are they telling us all this? Well, because as a police officer, you have to be ready for that. You have to be kind of tough. You don't have to be mean or you don't have to be a jerk, but you kind of have to be tough sometimes, right? Does anybody get nervous when they see a police officer? I do. Even to this day, I do. In fact, just on the way here, I was at 90th and Dodge, and this police officer pulled up behind me, and I was like, oh, shoot. I wasn't even moving. I was at a red light. I was like, what, I didn't do anything. What, did I do something wrong, you know? And then I'm like driving real slow, you know? Because they're kind of intimidating, aren't they? Police officers are kind of intimidating. And that's the way it should be, right? You wouldn't want a police officer protecting you that was kind of a pushover, would you? That was kind of a too nice of a guy. And so this is the class they're giving us, that you need to have a prevailing mindset. When you're the police officer, and if you catch somebody doing something wrong, you have to win. Okay? You have to win. And that means you have to be tough. You have to be willing to maybe grab somebody and hold them, you know, put cuffs on them. You have to be willing maybe to even take out that baton, maybe, and to protect somebody, and maybe have to hit somebody, maybe get in a fight, maybe even pulling out a gun and shooting somebody. And you have to be ready to do that. So I'm sitting in the back of the room, and they're talking about all this, and I'm getting out my cell phone under the table, and I'm looking through pictures of my little baby at the time, and seeing beautiful pictures of my wife and my family. And I'm literally trying not to cry, because I realized I don't have it. That's not me. I don't have that in me to do that. I'm not the bad guy. I'm not the bad, you know. I'm this guy, you know. If I were a cop and if I told somebody to get on the ground and they didn't, I'd probably be like, seriously, come on, please. You know, that wouldn't be good. Somebody could get hurt, right? So I went home that night and I was just crushed. I was crushed. I went to bed and I was laying in bed next to my wife and I just started bawling and crying. And it was like ugly cry. Anybody have ugly cry? I have ugly cry. And I was shaking, you know, and sobbing. And my wife said, what in the world is wrong? What's going on? I said, her name is Crystal. I said, Crystal, I think this has all been a great big mistake. She said, what's been a mistake? What are you talking about? This is a Friday night. And I said, this whole police thing. She said, what are you talking about? So I began to share kind of what I just told you about this class we had taken. And how I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can be a police officer. She says, what are you talking about? This is your life. You've been doing this, you searched for this job for 2 years. I said, I know, but I can't do it. I can't do it. And I cried some more. And I even got out of bed. She didn't kick me out of bed. I got out of bed on my own. I slept on the couch that night. And I woke up the next morning and I had to call the police department back and say I won't be coming in on Monday. I need to resign my position. And probably to this day the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Because I got the job, you know. And my wife and my baby had been so happy that I'd gotten that job. And I was happy too, only to realize it had all been kind of a big mistake. That wasn't who I was meant to be. So began 2 more years of this. It hurt bad. I didn't know what to do. My wife was working as a nurse, and so she made enough money. I didn't necessarily have to get a job. At that point, I didn't even know what job I wanted anymore. Well, what about church ministry? I thought you wanted to be a pastor or a chaplain or something like that. You know what? I didn't even care anymore. Because I thought I wanted to be a police officer, and that was a big, huge mistake. Maybe this whole ministry thing, maybe this whole church thing, this whole pastor thing, maybe that's all wrong too. I don't even know anymore. If I was so sure about wanting to be a police officer and that wasn't right, I don't know what to do. So for 2 years, literally 2 years, I was unemployed. And I would sleep in the morning, and I would twiddle my thumbs all day, and then I would watch TV at night when my family came home or whatever, and I would go to bed. I did nothing for 2 years. It was horrible. I'll admit at first it was kind of nice to sleep in a little bit, but it became terrible. I didn't have a purpose. I didn't know what I was supposed to be. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And so I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed, did not know what to do. Finally, just out of kind of desperation, I found a program at the hospital where I work where they teach you how to be a hospital chaplain. I had never thought about that before. Actually, I had thought about that before. About 7 years prior to that, this is kind of a little side story, but my nephew, he's your guys' age now, but he had been only 6 or 7 years old and got rushed to the hospital in Des Moines. He got rushed to the hospital for emergency brain surgery. He's okay now, by the way, had a happy ending there. But they took, out of a 7-year-old's brain, they took a chunk out the size of an orange. Can you believe that? There was some kind of massive blood vessels or something, and he almost died. But he's fine now. It's a happy story. But as we were waiting in the waiting room that night for the doctor to come out and tell us that Braden, that's his name, he was going to tell us, is that your name? Great name. He was going to tell us that Braden survived or that Braden died. That's how scary this was. And as we were waiting, a hospital chaplain came up and prayed with us, gave us some kind words, and then moved on. And I told my wife or my mom at the time that I was sitting next to, I said, this was before all the police stuff, and I said, there's something I could never do. Could never do a hospital chaplain at all. Which didn't really mean anything at the time. But then I go through this whole police stuff, right? And then that kind of ruined my life a little bit. And so I find this program at the hospital where they can teach you how to be a hospital chaplain. And out of pure desperation, I didn't have anything else to do in my life, I said, well, I'll go ahead and sign up for it. Even though I remember how scary it was to be in that waiting room, and that chaplain came and prayed with us, and I said, I would never, ever want to do that. But I'll sign up for this class anyway, just for something to do, and it paid a little bit. And within 2 or 3 weeks of that class, I fell head over heels in love with being a hospital chaplain. And it became, to me, the greatest thing ever. I found myself right where I needed to be. Now, when you hear me and you see me talking and stuff, can you imagine me as a police officer?
Oh, yeah,
No.
for sure.
What's that?
For sure.
Heck no. Pull over, please. But I find myself now in that position, just like Mr. Neil Dover, way back in high school, saying, why would I ever retire when this is the job I'd love to do? And going through all that stuff that I went through, finally finding that position. And I came home from the 2nd or 3rd day of that class on how to be a hospital chaplain, and I remember telling my wife, this is it. this is it. I think I found it. She didn't really believe me. But after a year of saying, this is it, she's finally gotten to realize, yeah, he loves this job.
Wait,
And so, yeah,
how long have you had this job?
I've had this job now about 3 years.
Really?
Yeah, yep, and I love it. You know what's funny is my wife is a nurse. I'm a chaplain. We both work in different hospitals. But she will come home from work and she'll say, I'll say to her, hey, how was your day, honey? You know, she'll tell me about being a nurse and how she had to clean poop off of a patient, you know, or how this one particular patient was just like super crabby and mean to her, or maybe the doctors that came around, they were kind of mean to the nurses that day. It was just busy nonstop, couldn't keep up. And I'll say something like, wow, you know, I don't think you could pay me enough to do that, to do your job. You know, I don't know how you do it. But she's made for it, you know. So she'll say, well, Keith, how was your day? And I'll say, oh, it was a pretty normal day. You know, as a hospital chaplain, I talked to a group of kids, you know, on spirituality. I got called to the emergency room because someone died, and I had to talk to the family after the person died. And you know, then I went up and did this and did that, and she'll say, oh my gosh, how do you do that? You know, there's no way you could ever pay me enough money to do that. But I'm made for that. I'm built for that. And so that's kind of my story. That's the story of my calling, my vocation, how I got to where I need to be. I'm nothing special. I'm just a regular dorky dad with a, you know, with a pretty regular job. But when you find that job that you're passionate for, I'll tell you the same thing that Mr. Neil Dover told me, and that's look for that job that you never want to retire from, and don't settle for less. Don't settle for less.
You guys have any questions?
What do you think about that? Does that make sense? Any questions? Yeah.
How does it like not make you sad?
Yeah.
Like
Like
how does
seeing
your
all
job
the-
not make you sad?
That's a good question. Like being around people that die all the time and
Yeah.
all that stuff. Yeah.
That's
It does make me sad. It does. Part of the training that we go through is how to process our own emotions. And so I would hope that it would never stop making me sad. When somebody dies, if I don't feel sad anymore, that's when I know I need to stop and look at myself a little bit more. I don't want to get too cold to it. So we have special training on how to go through that. We go through kind of like counseling on ourselves too. So, yeah, there's a difference between fun and rewarding. Okay, so when I help a family and their grandma just died, or heck, even worse, maybe a kid died or something like that. You know, it's not fun, but when I go home at the end of the day, it's been rewarding to help a family out through that time. So, have you ever had something real bad happen in your life? Like a big tragedy, and a friend of yours just came and just sat with you? You ever had that happen? And that's kind of what we do. So, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Any other thoughts or questions?
Well, your story's interesting because it's not just about finding your calling.
Right.
You went down some roads that you thought
Yeah.
were yours, and then it turned out to not be.
Yeah. And that's okay. It wasn't fun, but it was okay. Right?
Maybe even it was helpful to clarify what your real calling was, because you know you don't want to feel like that. You don't want to feel useless or
Yep.
or where you have to be somebody you're not.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of finding your calling too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like I was mentioning before. I had everything I had almost everything I needed to be a police officer. I mean, they hired me out of 300 people, you know, and I was passing all the tests. I was doing everything right, but I didn't have the passion for it. I didn't have the giftedness for it. I didn't have that calling to that job, which is so necessary, so necessary. So that's my encouragement to you guys. You guys are young. Maybe some of you know what you want to do when you grow up or when you go to high school and college. Maybe some of you kind of know what you want to do. That's awesome. You know, you might end up doing that. You might not end up doing that. Even though today it seems like that might be what you are going to do. See, I had my whole life planned out when I had my girlfriend, and I was going to go to get my master's degree, and we were going to get married. I had that all planned out, but God came in and said, we're going to do this a different way. And I'm so glad that He did. It hurt a lot. It really did. But I'm so glad that it turned out the way that it did. And who knows what's going to happen in my life in the next 10, 15 years. Maybe I'll be doing something completely different. I don't know. Maybe it'll hurt to get there. I don't know. You know, we stay faithful to God and stay in touch with Him. And we don't always know where He's leading us, but He leads us.
How many of you guys have your life mapped out?
You got it all figured out where you're going to go, what you're going to do? Awesome.
Wait, what?
I think another really good encouragement. So, one more thing. Another really good encouragement is when it's not working out for you, get out. You know, not just if you had a bad day, but if it's like really not your thing.
You know, I'm glad you said that. When I had feelings like that, like I wanted to leave the police department, I called a buddy of mine who's a police officer.
Yeah.
He said, don't get out. He said, just stick with it. Just stick with it. You know, maybe it'll change. And I said, no, I was so strong in my mind that I had to get out, you know, because I was like, there's just no question about it.
Well, sometimes you do. You look at the money or the benefits.
Right?
And you say, well, I'm going to stay with it for this money and the benefits, but it's killing you inside.
Yeah.
You know, stop.
Yep.
Do what you're made for.
Do what you're made for. I like